My main takeaway from it was we're not going to win the World Cup. We're just not going to win the World Cup.
I know so many people with disabilities, they're really, really scared. They can barely pay their bills and survive as it is.
The laziness of the claim that adolescence should be shown in schools around the country. If we do show it in schools, then what? Is it going to magically conjure up more money for the state education system that is so chronically underfunded?
What's going on, people? Welcome to this week's episode of Whisper It Loudly. I'm Jordan Jarrett-Bryan in the hot seat this week. I'm joined by Darren Lewis and Hugh Woozencroft as per usual. And you'll notice that we are not joined once again by Troy Townsend. I want to call him out because we were all last night at the SJAs, the Sports Journalism Association Awards. A quick mention for that in a second. But Troy was there. So Troy found it upon himself to copy my attire and my style and my look last night, but didn't find enough time to join us this morning on the pod. We made the effort. It's bright and early. It's 9 a.m. in the morning. The party finished, I think, at midnight, but yet the three of us are here. I'm just saying.
Got home at 2.
Got some people got home at 2. There you go, Troy. But yet here, bright and bushy-tailed, ready to pod. But it's fine. We still love you, Troy.
Listen, I'm sure he's here in spirit.
Don't give him an out. Just before we get into the football chat, we're going to be having a couple of non-football chats later in the pod. We'll be talking later on about some of the pending cuts across the welfare system, in particular those affecting those with disabilities. And we're also going to be talking about young boys and young men and where we are with a generation of young men who seem to be struggling, seem to be lost. And we're going to have a guest, Alex Holmes, who's an expert in this space, to talk about that a bit later in the pod as well. But first of all, before we get to the football, I want to say just another round of applause to Mr. Darren Lewis for what was second year in a row, a fantastic awards ceremony last night. El Presidente. It was a fantastic evening. Just some quick words from me, and Hugh and Darren, please chip in if you have any words. Big shout out to friend and colleague of ours, Miles Addy, who picked up the award for his platform Content Club, an inaugural award for that. The guy has been grafting for years, got his break and recognition last night. Big up Robbie Lau, AFTV won an award, but they've won many awards, but also a special shout to Flex, again, a friend and colleague of many of ours as well, who I believe it was United View's first award. So happy for him, for KG and all the crew behind the camera there. And my final words on this would be that, you know, journalism is being redefined, and it always has been. And to see that the digital platforms and the content creators who make video now being recognized under the banner of journalism, I think is great to see. A testament to the work, Darren, that you're doing there at the SJAs, and big up all of the other award winners as well. Hugh looked great as usual last night. Any words on last night, Hugh, apart from getting home at 2?
No, I just want to say well done to Darren Lewis once again. For those of you that don't know, Darren is the president of the Sports Journalism Association.
El Presidente.
Many people describe him as the godfather of sports journalism. All the corruption and connotations that go with the godfather are also true about him.
Round envelopes will be received.
It was a special night. If brown envelopes made a difference, I might have won an SJA by now. So clearly Darren is above board. No, but just to thank Darren for a special evening. You know, the awards, there has been clearly, and Darren can say them himself, but a direction of, you know, the industry changing. So the awards need to change. The people who win awards, therefore, changes. You know, the braps in the room may have disturbed a few people, but this is now the industry.
I'm here for it, Hugh. Yeah. More braps, please. Come on.
And listen, Darren's led the way and inspired many of those people who are coming through now. So again, thank you to him for that. As a colleague, obviously more than a friend, even if we didn't work together and do the podcast together, you know, I'd still have this view about him as I did before I met him. You know, he's done great things and led the way for many people. So long may it continue. Darren Lewis.
No, thank you very much. It's just, to be honest with you, I think just to see the faces and the people is enough, you know, and all of us love journalism. All of us love consuming it, reading it, being a part of it. And I think whether you're younger, whether you're older, there are lots of people who have done a lot of hard work in the journalism industry who have a lot to offer and want to be able to offer it. It is there for everyone. And I think the job to continue doing is to continue building what the people who've come long before me have done, but also to really recognize the very talented people who are of our generation and the younger generations as well. So hopefully that all makes for a good night and we can continue to make that happen.
Not quite sure I'm happy with you kind of lumping us in with our generation as if we're like the same age, but totally,
This is the bit
totally.
where you're supposed to be nice to me.
Yeah, I mean, it was going well until that bit. We've totally eaten into our England chat time, so apologies for kind of taking off steer there. But to be honest, the SJAs was a lot more interesting than England's games.
Yeah,
Thomas
we
Tuchel's
don't need that
opening
much
game.
time to dissect
No, we
England.
don't.
We don't need that much time.
Let's touch on it though. England's opening 2 games brought Thomas Tuchel in his first 2 games 2 wins, both at Wembley. A win against Latvia last night, and a win against 3-0, and a win against Albania 2-0 on Friday night. Hugh, I'll come to you first. I mean, for me, people are saying, "Oh, it was a bit boring, stale. Both games a bit meh." But I guess as Thomas, from his perspective, it's 5 goals, 2 clean sheets. The debutants that he's picked had good games. One even scored in Mars Lewis Skelly. Big up Mars Lewis Skelly and the family as well. Friends of the pod. No injuries. It was a bit of a kind of like a 6 points in the bag. Keep it moving, sort of camp or period for me in terms of Tuchel. Was it exciting? No, but just get the points in the bag. Any thoughts or hot takes?
Well, it might be a hot take. My initial thought was just generally on the 2 games, nothing's changed. So now, whether that is a hot take or not, I don't know. Whether people expected immediate change, I don't know. But I think this was more about seeing Thomas Tuchel's methods than learning about the players or where this England team is. I think we knew that the England are starting from a fairly low bar. They have not played great football over the last couple of years. So the idea that they were going to immediately play great football was obviously, living in outside of reality. It just wasn't going to happen. But I did expect some things to be a little bit clearer. I didn't expect it to be as much an experiment as it was, because he is stressed, and we all know that the World Cup's in 15 months, and his job ends after the World Cup, and his job is to win the World Cup. So I expected him to come in and say very clearly, this is how I view you as players. These are your roles. I'm not going to be seeing if you're okay on the right wing. Oh, can this player play as a number? I don't want to be experimenting with players. I see Jude Bellingham as X. I see Phil Foden as Y. You know what I mean? I use Eberici Eza in this role. I think he had to be fairly well defined, not necessarily know the end result, but certainly know what his plan was for individual players. And it felt like the 2 games were more of an examination into how these players work, into what works well for us than I thought it would be. And my main takeaway from it was, we're not going to win the World Cup. We're just not going to win the World Cup. Anyone that thought we were going to win the World Cup, I mean, you were probably, living in a bit of a fantasy world anyway, but reality is starting to hit home already. They are not going to turn themselves into world beaters in the next 15 months. They're not. There are some very good players. They can make big improvements. They might be semi-finalists. Who knows? They might be a finalist, but I cannot see this squad of players beating the world's best. Not because they're not good enough, not because the manager's not good enough. It simply boils down to time. I truly looked at it and said, this could be the beginning of something great. We might win the next Euros. We might win the World Cup after the upcoming World Cup. If he's going to be there for 5-6 years, then it was the perfect start. It is just the start of getting to know one another. But when you add in the crucial element of time ahead of the next World Cup, you see that, come on, there's levels here. And if you watch the Nations League quarterfinals, if you watch the Netherlands, if you watch Spain, if you watch France, the great players that are coming through at France, the level that they're playing at the moment, or the likes of even Portugal, you'd understand just how difficult it's going to be, for England to go and win that World Cup. And that's before adding South American teams to the mix. So I think that the two games were what they were. It is what it is. For me, there were positive performances. They showed that Thomas Tuchel's team is going to be more about control than entertainment. But ultimately, we're a long way off where we would want to be if we're going to win the World Cup. So again, I don't think I'm saying anything that should surprise anyone. But again, for me, it was good. And had it been amazing, great, I might be saying something different here today. But it's what I expected.
Darren Lewis, we're not going to win the World Cup. Over to you, Mr. Positive.
I'm completely the opposite. It won't surprise you to know.
You think we're going to win the World Cup?
Nobody can say with any certainty that any country is going to win the World Cup. But I do think, based on our form, our players, our squad, our manager, and listen, it's no secret that I feel we should have had an English manager, even though Tuchel is a superb communicator with a fantastic winning record. The competition, as I've said on the pod before, is our best against their best. And as exceptional as a coach as Tuchel might be, it's kind of bending it a little bit to go down that route rather than trusting another one of the English coaches to get the best out of these players and persevering until we get to where we want to be. In terms of the two games, I think that those games represent Thomas Tuchel doing his due diligence, because if we did pick a first choice team for all of the games or as near as possible, and then we got to the World Cup and a key player was not available for one reason or another, and he hadn't seen what the players in games like this were able to do, then we would say he didn't do his job. He didn't look at the players he should have looked at. He didn't give opportunities to the players who were on the fringes, who could have stepped in and deputized. We should not want to be playing in the third game of a group from which we've already qualified with the same players who are going to be relying on in the latter stages. That's what Southgate did in our group stage, as he tried to appease people who said he wasn't exciting enough. And so he had squad players who were at the tournament who are just not getting that game time. That should not be the case. So 2 wins, 2 clean sheets against opposition we should be beating anyway. What I'd like to see is more of that and more of an identity. We know who the top players are. We know who the top performers are. We know who the consistent performers are. That doesn't worry me as much. I liked what I saw in terms of what he's trying to do. I didn't like the fact that I didn't see enough of an identity. I want to see that going forward. Even if teams sit deep, drop back, I want us to see us pummeling them. Crosses in from the wide areas, not side to side. I want to see some of the stuff that we see in the Premier League when teams sit deep and challenge another team to break them down. And I do think we have that in our locker. But can we win the World Cup in 2026? I think we have the players, the experience, the leadership, the nous, the technical ability. We have every chance.
All right, we're going to come back to England, chat, no doubt, throughout the season. I mean, I would just say Thomas Tuchel will be judged from the quarterfinals. He's been brought in to kind of to win the quarterfinal, win the semi-final, win the
Do you
final.
think
That's
we can win it?
No, but I don't think we can win it because of the reasons that I didn't think we could win the Euros or the last World Cup. I still think we're missing that key player in the middle of the park that in the toughest games knows how to run games. We don't produce that player. We produce runners, we produce finishers, it's true. It's true. Every team that wins the World Cup or Euros has that player, and this country we don't produce that player, Darren. We don't. And that, I think if we had that player, I would be with you. I
So
just don't think
Bellingham
we
can't
have
run
that player.
games.
No,
Bellingham can't
he's not.
run games.
He's not that player. He's not that
No,
player,
no.
Darren. He's an athlete. He's a technical G, but he's not the guy in the middle of the park that controls the game. He's not a Modric. He's not a Pirlo. He's not a Xavi. He's not that guy. He's not that guy. And I don't think England produced those sorts of players. So that's the reason why I don't think they'll win the World Cup. But like I say, Tuchel will be judged primarily on
Let
3
me
games: the quarterfinal,
l- l- l-
semi-final, and the final.
let me just make the point,
Go on, quickly.
because the other big takeaway from the England camp was Thomas Tuchel giving an opportunity to players that don't deserve one. Um, it was him coming in and saying, "Some of you have done great things in an England shirt previously, and I'm going to give you the chance to show me that you're that player." Um, and for me, he set the wrong tone early on, and very quickly had to turn things around. Leaving Morgan Gibbs White out of the squad completely, and then by the second game, you're in your press conference before the match saying what an incredible character he is, and how much he has to offer England. Well, then why wasn't he in the squad to begin with? Why wasn't he in the squad to begin with? Starting Marcus Rashford and Phil Foden in the first game. Foden didn't warrant inclusion in the squad, full stop. Like, it's okay if you want to, and I don't mind him doing this. If he wants to say, these are my 23 players, these are the players who I want to have every single camp because I believe this will be the best squad when we get to the World Cup. I actually don't mind him doing that.
No, me
Um,
neither.
because as I say, his job's to win the World Cup and he doesn't have long to do it. So if he wants to go continuity and he just believes that Phil Foden will get his form back for his club by the time we get to the World Cup, then Foden's going to be in it every single time. And he just says, these are the best 23 players that England has to offer. And I'm just going to pick them, in my opinion, every single camp. I'm not totally against that. But the message, the de-incentivization for players to push to be in that squad, if he does that, I think would be a negative in the long term. So
All
you've
right.
got to bring Jared Bowen in. The first game, you're screaming for Gordon and Bowen to come on. Bowen starts the second game. You're sitting there, you're like, he is currently, this was also a reminder, he's learning what it is to be an international coach. That's the reality. There's Deschamps, they kept him on for a long time, not just because he was successful, Deschamps, but because it is not an easy job for someone to just come into and be successful at. Southgate stayed for a long time. Germany keeps their manager for a long time. Any international manager whose side is performing solidly, this isn't club football. You can get to quarterfinals. In international football, you will probably keep your job because it is not club football. And that was another thing that stood out to me. Our manager is still a club manager. He's still getting to grips with what it takes to be an international coach. He's had 2 games. By the time we get to the World Cup, he probably would have had 12 games. That's not a long
Listen,
time.
we're going to find out more about this England team and decisions that Thomas Tuchel will be making over the year. So let's hold tight for more of those games. But just as we are recording, there is some breaking news in the world of football. I'm going to throw to you, Hugh. It concerns a certain Liverpool player.
Yes, Liverpool and England's Trent Alexander-Arnold. I love these moves, to be perfectly honest. These are things that I applaud. But it looks like his 20-year association with Liverpool will come to an end this summer. Trent Alexander-Arnold will be heading to Real Madrid, which won't surprise anyone. It's been spoken about pretty much from the start of the season. It hasn't yet been confirmed as we speak, but it is being widely reported. So, and by the time you hear this, it may have been confirmed by either Liverpool or Trent Alexander-Arnold himself. Listen, it's a great move. Any English player playing for the biggest football club in the world, we have to applaud. He is a fantastic footballer. I know people will say one-on-one defending isn't his forte. The good thing is everything else is a 9 or a 10 out of 10. So, um, for England, for Jude himself, for what we are producing, it says a lot. We are producing now another player in the Real Madrid team, another English player of mixed heritage, from an upbringing which this isn't meant to happen to people like Trent, to people like Jude Bellingham. I have to say I love it. What else can I say? What else can any of us say? Maybe if we're Liverpool fans, we're hurt. I'm not in that camp. This is fantastic. It's fantastic for him, fantastic for his family, fantastic for the England team. I've got no complaints. I'm delighted for the guy. Darren, do you feel the same?
Yeah, quick word,
I
Darren.
do. I do. I totally agree with you. A fantastic player who has won everything there is to win with Liverpool. I don't have a single second doubt or concern about his ability to slot in with the best players in the world. His talent demands it. And it will be interesting to see how much more celebrated he is when he has a Real Madrid shirt on than possibly when he has a Liverpool shirt on, because obviously he's adored on Merseyside. But outside of Merseyside, there are so many people who look at, as is the English way, the negatives rather than the positives. He's a fantastic player. He deserves to have a fantastic experience at one, well, arguably the biggest club in the world.
Will he still
it
be
could
adored?
also-
I think a lot of people will see the side to his game that really should be embraced, and actually, in an ideal world,
No.
would see him
On Merseyside,
Liverpool.
will he
Oh,
still
yeah.
be
Oh,
adored
of course.
after he leaves?
Yes, forgive me. I think he will, because again, his service to the club has been fantastic. He's helped them to win a first title in 30 years, a Champions League as well. And also, if you think about his after academy on Merseyside, which helps to provide opportunities for young players that didn't make it, he's given back. He is somebody who hasn't just come through the ranks and got lots of money and gone off and done his own thing. He's very much a community guy. He lives with his family at the moment. He is a young man who isn't carried away with himself by any stretch of the imagination. So will he be adored on the red half of Merseyside still? I think everybody will adore him.
Listen, we'll pick up on this next week and go into it a bit more when I'm sure it will be confirmed, and the repercussions for Liverpool, if there are any at all. England, just going back to England chat, may be the beneficiaries as well of having a right back that plays for the biggest team in Europe as well. So there's lots of upsides and positives to this as well. Okay, enough of the
No
football
excuses,
chat.
Thomas. You got to win the World Cup.
Yeah, right. Easy. Okay, enough of the football chat now. Let's move on to some politics and a bit of current affairs chat, because here in the UK, the government have announced they're going to be cuts to the welfare bill, and as expected, many people who will be affected by some of these cuts are not happy. We're going to focus on disabilities and people who have disabilities today specifically, and we've joined by a guest, Alex Clegg, who's from the Resolution Foundation, who are an independent think tank who focuses on improving living standards for those on low to middle incomes. Good morning, Alex. How you doing?
Good morning. I'm good, thanks. Happy to be here.
Thank you for joining us today, Alex. Now, look, I work in the news and we all consume the news here on this call. I guess from the last couple of weeks, the two wars aside, the biggest story in the news has been what we're expecting to be some very difficult cuts within the welfare system. Can you just lay out, just kind of to start off with, what you're expecting to come and the projected figures of the amount of people who are going to be affected by some of these welfare cuts, specifically those who are disabled?
Yeah, absolutely. So the government announced last week changes to two benefits in particular, and it's important to understand the difference here. So one of them is personal independence payment, or PIP, as it's usually called, which is a disability, a benefit for people with a disability, which is intended to cover the costs, the extra costs that come with having a disability. It's not related to whether someone's working or how much other income they have. It's just for disability. And the other change was to universal credit for people with a health condition. And this is a means-tested benefit, which is focused on people who are out of work due to some kind of health condition. So it's more for people on low incomes, and it's more related to whether somebody can work or not. So the first cut falls on PIP in particular. The government is going to be changing the eligibility criteria, so they're kind of restricting the number of people that can get PIP. They're effectively saying that they'll support a narrower range of disabilities in the future. The change is going to come from 2026. And we're expecting that will mean about 1 million fewer people will be able to claim PIP, which is quite a big income loss, like around £4,200 a year for those people. it could be potentially dangerous for some quite vulnerable people to lose such a large amount of money. And it comes on the back of the government being quite worried about growing spending on disability benefits in particular. And the second change, the one to universal credit, is a kind of a rebalancing between the standard allowance that everybody on universal credit gets, whether they have health conditions or not, and the extra element that people get if they do have a health condition. The government's been really worried that there's too much of a big gap between those two elements, which they say effectively creates quite a large incentive to be found unable to work or unfit to work, because it effectively doubles your income. So that they're worried that people are more likely to kind of stay in that kind of out of work group if it's such a big gap. So they've raising the standard allowance by a little bit and cutting the health element by about half, by about £50 a week. And we're expecting that to affect around 2.5 million families by the end of the parliament. So yes, it's quite big cuts to quite a lot of people.
Can I ask, Alex, are you disappointed that as the government look to save money, that they are targeting effectively many of the people who would have voted for them, and many of the underprivileged, and almost seem to be ripping up what is supposed to be the principle of a Labour Party, let alone a Labour government?
Yeah, it is disappointing that the cuts are falling in this way, and the timing of it feels a little rushed. Like there's definitely issues in the benefit system that the government has identified and is trying to address quite rightly. They're doing some quite difficult stuff in terms of reshaping some of the details. On top of that, at the moment, with tomorrow we have the spring statement, it looks like the Chancellor is going to be falling short of the rules that she put in for herself in terms of government debt. And it looks like she is using this cut at this time in order to make up some of that shortfall. In which case, it does feel like these things have been rushed through. For example, the government announced that the big cut to PIP, and it also announced that it's going to be consulting on changes to the PIP assessment in the next few years. And you can conclude from that.
Viewers who don't know what PIP is, and Alex, just explain very briefly what that is.
So PIP is the main disability benefit I mentioned, the one that covers the extra costs of having a disability. And to be eligible, people have to go through quite a rigorous assessment based on what they can and cannot do in their daily life. And the government's identified that they want to review that assessment. They don't think it's quite fit for purpose at the moment, so they're consulting on that. But it feels like if they're going to be landing these big cuts at a point where they're not quite sure if the assessment is working in the right way, and they're doing the cuts in a way of restricting who passes the assessment, it feels like one thing is kind of coming before the other, and maybe at a time when these cuts, the saving from these cuts is quite convenient.
Alex, the thing that strikes me the most is that a lot of people are of the opinion, and so I certainly am, that this almost ruthless measure is being driven by the ruthlessness that we're seeing stateside in terms of the welfare system, and the Prime Minister wanting somehow to show the people, the administration in the US, that he too can target what the right wing would describe as the work shy, the feckless. And I'm disappointed that this Labour government is not making the distinction between the people who, when they're in opposition, they're often saying they can understand their situation. They understand that not everyone who isn't in work can't work, can work. A lot of people who are not in work can't work, but they're almost go along with this. Yeah, I will say this right-wing perception of the people who are not in employment being work shy, being lazy, being unwilling to go out and get a job. There seems to be, particularly with the rhetoric that we're seeing from the Health Secretary, a dismissal of the issues that people face, whether they're mental health issues, whether they're physical health issues. there seems just to be a ruthlessness in this area that has really shocked me, I have to say. And I think a lot of people remember by the time it comes round, by the time the next election comes around.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think definitely it feels like some of the complexities around people's conditions and people's people's lives is kind of being overlooked a little bit. I think there's definitely, it feels like the government has bought into this idea that you can kind of drive people towards working by cutting their income, when there's not really much evidence to support that, and there is evidence to support the opposite in terms of, if you push people into poverty or if you push people into really difficult times, it doesn't enable them to get themselves to a position where they can get better and start applying for jobs and can make that change in their life.
Hugh, just before you come in, sorry, just to say, so Alex, I've got a disability, but I have a job that I don't like using the word fortunate because I work hard to get my job, but I am fortunate, for want of a better phrase, that the job I do pays enough that I can pay my bills. So I'm one of the lucky ones, inverted commas, right? But I know so many people with disabilities who just the threats of the cuts are causing so much anxiety and so much stress. It's causing them to be even more incapacitated than they were previously. They're really worried. I've been to a couple of events in the last couple of weeks. Disability Journalism Forum last week and the week before that, NADAX, which is an exhibition in NEC for disabled people, and people are telling me that they're really, really scared. They're really, really scared. They can barely pay their bills and survive as it is. The mere idea that they may have some of those benefits cut or even lost really, really concerns them. And I'll just bring you in, Hugh, here as well. There's the human element that people are experiencing, going through struggles now, and then knowing they're going to lose more money. But then there's the governmental element that Darren brings in there, that Labour are supposed to be the government that are meant to be championing these kinds of people. I don't know if you know anybody that's got a disability or will be affected. But what's your overall view on what we expect to come in the next kind of few days and week?
Yeah,
You know,
I think
it's-
you.
Oh, sorry, that was
was
for
that to me?
Hugh.
Yeah.
Sorry, Alex. Sorry, that was for
Okay.
Hugh. Sorry.
Yeah, listen, I think it's very, very sad. The many groups who have been made a target because, and this is not just in the United Kingdom, but because of cuts, because of the need for cuts, because of apparently government efficiency, because of the fact that we've spent too much money. Maybe this is the knock-on effect of COVID and interest rates and inflation and debt. Again, it's a capitalist system where we all think in this country in particular that the welfare state was an important thing for all of us in many different ways. And it's just incredibly sad to see it being torn apart on the basis that we can't afford it. We can't afford it when we know the wastage, the corruption, the spending in other areas that doesn't add up time and time again. And that's the sad thing. People will see billions put towards military spending, for example. But if you ask people on the street, what would they rather see their government spend their money on? Of course, it would be this. So again, it's just incredibly sad, and largely it's not what people voted for. Had this been part of the manifesto, I don't think they get elected. It is another one of those things where maybe we haven't been directly lied to, but certainly the truth has been concealed. And I feel like these people have been made a really unfair target. And I agree with Darren, under the banner of, they want to go for these people. And they've spoken so much about young people, for example, who aren't in education or employment or in training. And it's almost like they've just done a segue and tried to put people with disabilities in that group. It's almost like, oh, it's a bit of a choice. Well, if they try a bit harder, then they would be able to go out and work and they wouldn't need these payments. Like, it is utterly disgraceful, in my opinion.
It's disgusting.
The media on the right wing, the politicians in the Labour Party, but obviously with right wing views in this regard, and all other parties who would agree with this are going along with it. It just shouldn't be happening, to be perfectly honest. Yes, as Alex points out, there needs to be a restructuring. There's evolution in everything, and we can do things better. This isn't the way to do it, in my opinion. I don't know what you think, Alex. Sorry about Jordan's question.
Just to pick up on that as well, if you can remember my question as well, Alex. Some would say, and it's been said that, and the Labour are reminding us every single week, we've come into a government that the economy was a mess. We have to fix the economy, and whether it's old people, young people, disabled people, single parent working individuals, someone's gonna be angry because we gotta make. Come on, guys, we can't just you can't borrow, we can't keep spending. At some point, we've got to fix this. This is what they would say. Do you have any reverence with the idea that everybody, unfortunately, no matter how hard up they are gonna have to tighten the belts a little bit and go without a little bit? And I accept that deaths is the extreme element of this. People are gonna die. People will die. So I don't ask this question lightly, but do you think there's any kind of semblance of truth in the fact that they don't really have an alternative, or is that a cop-out?
There's always alternatives in the economy. It's true that the economy is not in a good place, and it's true that it has deteriorated since the last budget in the autumn. And the Chancellor does need to find some kind of fiscal room somewhere, and the options for that are the cuts that she's doing, further cuts to public spending in health and other areas, or raising taxes. They've ruled out raising taxes, but we've been arguing here that there are a number of options. If they would look at taxes again, there's a number of things that they could do which would have much less sort of negative impact than these disability cuts. You could look at things like fuel duty again. Fuel duty is currently frozen. You could sort of reverse that freeze. You could slightly extend the freeze and the income tax thresholds for a couple of years, which would fall on everybody that was working, but only a little bit, and not to the point where anyone would really notice they were paying any more tax unless they got pay rises. So there are options that the government have rather than these cuts. And I think, going back to Hugh's point, I think it's really important to understand this argument around the benefit system being unaffordable. So the reality is that the last few years, and also the projection over the next few years, is that the spending on disability and incapacity benefits is set to rise quite a lot. But that's kind of being offset by spending in the rest of the benefit system. And overall, the benefits bill as a share of the economy, as a share of GDP, is set to be kind of flat for the next 5 years. And it's been sort of up and down, but it's not really much different now than it was in the mid-2000s, for example. So it's not that the whole welfare bill is out of control and we can't afford it. It's kind of that there's been a rebalancing from people receiving kind of standard benefits towards people receiving health-related benefits. And there are reasons for that within the system. There are reasons for that outside the system, in terms of there has been a real deterioration in people's health. And it's very complex, and it's not something that can just sort of be reversed with a cut. So it's unfortunate that that's kind of the approach at the moment.
And just lastly, go on quickly, Darren, quickly.
Well, I just think, I mean, Alex sets it out very, very well, and very, very diplomatically. But the upshot of it is that people like yourself, Jordan, are affected by you saying that you have a disability. You've probably spoken the least in this debate, and yet you are among the people who are most affected. And yes, you do say that you feel that you're in a very positive place at the moment, but I kind of feel that you are aware of so many other people who are not, who are worried by this, who are affected by this, who have been adversely targeted by this, who, I'm going to stick it on you now, I almost feel like you have a duty to speak for.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is what I'm trying to do, and this is what I wanted to bring up on the podcast, because I think there's a media narrative. I think it was Hugh said earlier on, from the right wing of our media, that portrays these people as feckless or not wanting to work. I don't know anybody that doesn't want to work. I don't know anybody that doesn't want to work. Everybody wants to work. Forget the fact that you need to work to earn money to pay bills. There's a social element, there's a psychological element that comes with working that I think people want to be a part of. Who doesn't want to be in a team? Who doesn't want to be part of a group? Who doesn't want to contribute to building something, creating something, working on a service? So, are there people gaming the system? Yeah, there are. Of course there are. Of course there are. But I don't believe that it's a big enough number for us to really portray this narrative that people, disabled people in particular, don't want to work. Everyone that I speak to who's in a chair, has multiple sclerosis, has, is an amputee, is neurodivergent, whatever disability may be, learning difficulties, wants to work. So the government's job for me is to find an infrastructure that enables these people to be able to work and works out, how do we get the best from you? These people have talents, experiences, intelligence. These people aren't idiots. These people can contribute and they want to contribute. But this framing that these people are just happy, just I'll be at home all day watching daytime TV and getting benefits and making you, Hugh, and you, Darren, and you, Alex, and you, Jordan, pay for it. It's just a myth. It's just not true, and it really angers me because it doesn't make any sense. And if the government want to really get the economy going, find a way to get these people working because they want to work. And I will speak up for them.
May I ask you,
Yeah.
Jordan, do you feel, as a disabled person, again, you have your show, the world's
Call us
cruelest, so you
disabled.
speak
Yep.
a lot of amputees and a lot of people who are in a similar situation to yourself. Do you feel let down that it's a Labour government that these cuts are coming? Are you surprised by
Yes and
the
no.
cut?
Yes and no, because I don't think this Labour government is the Labour government of what it started out as. I don't think this Labour government really work in the interests of what the fabric and the fibre of what Labour governments are supposed to be. So I'm not surprised. I think we're also in a time of government where it's just about getting votes. It's just about getting votes and get the votes. However you can get them, you get the votes. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say they were lying to people, but I think we've seen the news. We've seen people that have spoken and said that had they've known Labour were going to do these sorts of things, would they have voted for Labour? The answer's no. The answer's no. So I'm disappointed in as far as after 14 years, you've waited 14 years to get in and make a difference. You have bashed the Tories for 14 years about, remember that word austerity? We had that for about a decade. You killed them for all of that. You finally get in the door, and this is how you're moving. And I don't make what they're doing. These aren't easy decisions. As I mentioned earlier on, I asked Alex, changes have to be made. Things have to be done. I think people accept that. I think people are prepared because of 14 years. They're prepared now to be able to suffer a little bit. But this is more than suffering a little bit. People are gonna, the extremities of the impacts of these cuts are gonna have on people goes beyond suffering a little bit. So am I disappointed? Only as far as this isn't what I was hoping for 14 years a Labour government would bring to the House. But I'm not disappointed. I'm not surprised because I think this is a government that just wants to stay in power, and they're in power now, and they're making decisions that I think are cruel and go against Labour values. And what makes it worse, finally, is that it's a double whammy because they're losing everybody. It's not like they're doing really difficult things, but we're keeping these guys over here. You're doing difficult things and you're losing everybody anyway. So it just doesn't make sense to me. Find ways to get people, everyone, working, because most people that I know want to work and have something to offer. I'll give the final word to you, Alex, in terms of when is the confirmation of these cuts? Is it this or next week that we can expect some figures and some confirmed announcements?
So tomorrow, alongside the spring statement, there's going to be an impact
tomorrow.
assessment.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's in that document. Hopefully, we should get the number of people that are going to be affected, the type of people that are going to be affected, how much we expect them to lose. So just some more detail, some more clarity. we were hoping that information would come last week with the announcements. They decided to wait till now. I think that's not ideal because there is this uncertainty. Hopefully tomorrow there'll be more, but we don't know yet what's going to be exactly released.
I wasn't going to do this, but as Darren mentioned it, a quick plug for my podcast, The World's Coolest Disabled. If you want to hear some storytelling and some positive portrayals of disabled people doing some amazing things, and talking sometimes about some of the current issues in the news as well, on all your podcast platforms, The World's Coolest Disabled, Jordan Jarrett-Bryan. Go check it out on YouTube as well. Alex, thank you very much for your time today. If people can go to the Resolute Foundation to keep across you and your team's work. I'm sure you'll be busy over the next 48 hours with what's coming. So we'll put again your notes in our description on our YouTube channel as well. Thanks for your time. Okay, let's get now into our final part of the show. We're gonna have a chat about something that me and the guys have been speaking about for a little while, wanted to have this discussion for a little while. We're going to have a chat around the issue of young men, boys, the lack of, I guess, support systems around young boys in this country. I'm trying to not use the phrase role models anymore. I prefer the phrase support system. And to do that, we've got someone on, a good friend of mine and colleague, who's done a lot of work in this space. We're going to be joined by Alex Holmes, who's a men's mental health therapist and the author of the book Time to Talk. Welcome, Alex.
Hi guys. Happy to be here.
Thank you for joining us there, Alex. Let's have a chat now about some of those themes that you mentioned there, guys. And I'll start with you, Alex. I mean, we know the numbers are soaring through the roof regarding men's suicide. I'm being told by many young men that they're obsessed. Young men are obsessed by certain very influential influencers online. The ages of young boys stabbing and killing each other is getting younger. And anecdotally, I can tell of so many examples of young men I see week to week who just seem very angry, Alex, very disillusioned and lost. Okay. There's a lot of themes in there, but let me just kick off with you by asking, is any of what I've just listed there reflected in what you're seeing with the young men that you work with?
Yeah, I mean, these are big questions and those are big words, man. Angry, disillusioned, lost, right? So in my experience, I think working with young men in schools as a counselor and as a group counselor with them, a lot of them were really struggling with purpose. A lot of them were really struggling with direction, and there wasn't enough direction happening outside of school and within the school as well. The schools can only do so much. I mean, in the classroom, they have 20 odd students there that they need to focus on. So when I was in the school, I was kind of responsible for creating therapy circles, workshops and whatnot, kind of identifying certain boys to come into the program and then talk about what's going on with them. So we do the group work, we do the individual work, and then I work with the senior leadership teams to kind of help figure out what the best way through is for these young people. They feel, from what I remember and what I experienced, they feel not heard. They just feel abandoned, feel let down in so many different ways, but they can't articulate that. They don't exactly know why this is happening because people are just telling them and barking orders, but they're not explaining what the situation is that they need to do. So they don't really have much of a reverence for authority or for any of that direction too. So that's just on one side. But I also think that there aren't enough people who know how to speak to boys and young men as well. So there's those two kind of collaborating issues that make it difficult for young boys to kind of really make it through a very particular system which is designed a very particular way. I don't know, man. I grew up and I was talking to my mum about this the other day. I was like, I grew up and I was busy. I was busy all the time. There was always something to do. There was an after school club here. There was a football group there. There was a basketball club there. There was swimming. There was always something. And it seems like there isn't enough of that happening for systemic reasons going on. And most schools don't have the resources or the staff or the money to be able to kind of put on these groups. And with youth clubs closing and whatnot, the social aspect of being in a group of other people, is not really kind of happening. So they stay online. And then we then hear the issues that that we probably are going to get onto in a minute. But then we enter into a new frontier, a new wild west, as it were. You know what I mean? Of social media.
I'm so glad you mentioned the fact that when we were younger, we had things to do, because I was thinking about this the last kind of week or so, and that's what I came down to. I kind of put myself in a scenario of what was happening when I was this age, when I was between 15 and 21, and I was busy. I had things to do, and there's a Jamaican saying, what is it? The devil gives the g- the devil gives
Makes
idle
work
hands.
for
What was
idle
it?
hands.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think I think that's really, when you've got nothing to do, you invariably turn towards badness. Before I come to you, Hugh and Darren, just Alex, more from you. So, what is the work that you are doing? You said that people don't know how to talk to young boys. So, how are you communicating with these young boys to tell them what they're doing is wrong? They don't know it already, but also this is what you can and should be doing.
Mm. So I no longer work in schools at the minute. So at the minute, I'm just building out men's groups for sixth formers and upwards, because I found that the 17 to 18-year-olds are being kind of left to their own devices. So they go through all that structure of school, year 7 to 11. They have that structure, and then it comes to year 12, 13, or college and whatnot. They have all these random freedoms. All of a sudden, they've got free periods here, there, or wherever, but they are still kind of abandoned, in the school. It's like, oh, you're old enough to know better, but you're still
Mhm.
young enough to make really kind of, long-term mistakes that are happening there. So creating programs for that, I've done a few in some colleges, and then I'm just doing adult men's groups. But what to say is how to speak to them is that when I was working with year 8s to 10s, um, they want to know that you are both in control of the situation, of the space, but you're also giving them that they know the bounds of the conversation. They know the bounds of the situation. They know that once you give them the firm boundaries and stick to them, and then treat them like people, and give them the framework that you're trying to work with as well, and then you kind of create safety within the boundary. So you have that psychological safety of, I think what we tended to do was, so we create the circles, but we also had to create agreements within the circle, as in what we won't tolerate as a group. Obviously, I would kind of input a lot more of that with regards to the safety aspect, um, and the like when it comes to behavior, especially behavior outside of the circle. So if you are behaving in this circle, but then you go to maths and then you're being quite frankly, a fool, right? Then that kind of that implements the circle. So then you are developing an understanding of accountability and responsibility for things that are outside of you. And when you start to do
Mm.
that, those are skills that are developed as you grow older and as you grow into a man, when you know that your actions impact the lives of other people, especially when you are working in teams. And what we don't see very often is we're not seeing a lot of young boys working in teams. We're not seeing them working in these spaces. I mean, I grew up with seeing air cadets, army cadets, all these kind of cadets, beavers, scouts, all them things, swim team, football team. You learn how to work in a team among other people. So you know that if you make a mistake, the team fails. So then what do you do there? And I don't think we see that enough. So I'm kind of, when I was working in the schools, that was the impact. But I've taken that same kind of theory and brought it to the circles that I'm creating, because you know it it, it you get to a certain age, and sometimes you kind of just have been conditioned that way, and you really do need to unlearn and rework outside of yourself.
Mhm.
But then at that point, you're developing what we call empathy and understanding for other people.
Darren, I mean, you wrote a column last week in the Mirror, I guess triggered by the Gareth Southgate speech at the Dimbleby lecture, in which you wanted to highlight much of what Gareth Southgate was saying is already being done by leaders within the community, and we will come to that in a little bit in terms of solutions and what is happening already. But another thing I keep often hearing is that there's an issue of lack of fathers in the homes, right? And support around these young boys. and that's deposited as reason for the lack of discipline and guidance for a lot of these young men. You're a father of young men. Is there any truth in the semblance that an element of this problem is these boys don't have, let's say men, father but men in their network to look to talk to be guided by, to be disciplined by?
You know, one thing about this whole conversation, I've written 2 columns around this whole thing. The one last week about the complete delusion to the point of lie that there are no leaders across cultures, across genders in this space long before people like Gareth Southgate. And what he said was terrific, but I just feel he's calling for leaders that are already there. They already exist, and it's a lie that they don't. It's a misconception. I don't want to sort of traduce anything that he said, because he said a lot of good stuff. But the other thing is exactly as you say. Whenever a conversation like this is had, there are lots of very basic, lazy stereotypes that people reach for. And one of them is that there are not fathers in the household. And it's why, listen, a lot of this debate was turbocharged by the drama Adolescence on Netflix. And in that drama, there was a mother and a father, a very stable home, a very stable upbringing. And none of them could do anything about the fact that their 13-year-old was in his room of an evening consuming the kind of content fed down the line by big tech at him that had nothing to do with whether you have a mother or a father, and everything to do with whether you've got one of these: a mobile phone, a laptop, an iPad, an iMac. So there are certain misconceptions that we have to do away with if we're going to have any chance of being able to address this adequately. The column that I've written this week is around the laziness of the claim that adolescence should be shown in schools around the country. It should be mandatory in school. Some of the people who are saying that don't have kids, so they have no idea what they're talking about. Some of the people who say that are politicians or adults who want to shift the responsibility of failing our kids away from them and onto schools. And as I said in my column, if we do show it in schools, then what? Is it going to magically conjure up more money for the state education system that is so chronically underfunded? Because it's dealing with this, it's dealing with bullying, it's dealing with misogyny, it's dealing with bad behavior, it's dealing with oversized classes, it's dealing with so many things. Actually, so many other things that have got nothing to do with school, but you want to stick it on the teachers rather than the politicians whose policies mean that parents have to go out and work all hours God sends, and they desperately want that time to spend with their kids, but they can't have it because they've got to make ends meet. They've got to do their best to provide for their children. This is not this is not there is no one panacea for this problem. But what we do have to recognize, if we've got a chance of being able to address this problem, is that we have to understand what is true and what is not. We have to stop jumping on bandwagons and going for the lazy, sloppy solutions. In many cases, parents have to be allowed to have some time with their kids. We've got to start from the basics, because learning. I know you meant it with the best of intentions, and this is too serious for us to have one of our knockabout things. But I often think, how to talk to young people. That starts in the culture that we develop in the home. That develops as a culture that we develop among us. If we've got a friend who is doing some of the things that some people would nudge and say, "Oh, well done," that's the kind of thing that you have to check in your circle. You can't come here and start saying, "What could we do better for the young people?" but then indulge in the kind of conversation with our peers that enables the kind of toxic behavior that we're trying to find a solution for with the generation below us. Pick a side.
Have some
Hugh,
standards.
Yeah, and I agree with Darren in the sense that this is a multifaceted situation that doesn't have one single magic bullet that fixes this problem. But for you, what would you pinpoint as something significant that you think, if we can start by addressing that, we can go some way to addressing the overall problem?
My view on all of these things is always it boils down to money. Always boils down to money. Everything in for me, what we live in an ultra capitalist society, not a capitalist society, an ultra capitalist society, where I feel like we don't spend money unless we believe it's going to make us money. That's it. That's the end of everything that we do, and every political decision that we make is putting the value of things as a pound sign or a dollar sign or whatever it might be. And I also feel like, and I say this so many times, I know people will call me a socialist, but capitalism will take everything. Capitalism's like the blob. I mean, it will just get bigger and bigger and bigger, and that's what it does. We went from a 20-hour working week to a 40-hour working week to um, two of the parents in the household. One of them was able to stay at home, one could work. Now it's both need to work just to make ends meet. You used to be able to save a little bit at the end of the month. Now it's taking your savings at the end of the month. And most importantly, in this conversation, now it takes your time, all of your time. Now one job is not enough to survive for many people. Now they need two jobs, so it takes time with their kids, that contact time that they need to support their children, to change their children. Change, that sounds a strange way, but they learn from you. You've got life experience. You share it with them. When they go through trials and tribulations, you guide them. That's it. And it's not just you, it's the people around you, it's friends, it's family. So often now we don't have that contact time, and the other aspect of it is investment when it comes to money. So as I say, is always money. When it comes to this point, it needs resources. It needs resources. It's an under resourced area. All of these children need more support. And again, it's not just the things that they do in their extracurricular society. It's people like Alex to go into schools, to speak to them, to identify with them, to talk to them about what they've been through, to share their experiences. It's a full circle thing. And that, ultimately, we don't pour enough into that area, and it leaves children feeling like they're disconnected from society, or they have no pathway, no direction, and what can we do to solve that? Give up one of our jobs, give up, or put more money in ultimately this is what we need to do. And it is a vicious circle because there is no immediate solution. But I did want to ask you a question, Alex, because you mentioned a little bit earlier on about you said not enough people know how to speak to young men. And I just wondered, for those people who are maybe parents or dealing with a young child who's going through difficult times, how do you best advise us to speak to young men?
You know what? Like, listening to what Darren said, just around, about the conversations had in the community and intra community. Is that the word? Yeah. Um, I think that kind of articulates it in a sense. You as a, I'm assuming, are you both fathers? Are you fathers here? No.
Just Darren.
So just Darren. So I know that I've got nephews, and I kind of speak to them in the way that I know for them individually, right? Each boy is different. Each boy requires a very particular kind of attention. For example, when I was talking about that, I was talking about en masse. If we're going to speak to boys in a group or in a way, there needs to be a very particular approach to that. And what I would say is that there needs to be a level of, I mean, I'm big on using humor. I'm big on using being very directive and being very clear with young men, because I think once you establish the boundaries and you establish that you are someone who's willing to banter with them to an extent, and then you build that kind of respect in a sense. So when I'm speaking to them en masse, that's one way to get through to them and kind of relate to them. I think on the show Adolescence, you saw how hard it was for the police officer to start to speak to the boy. You could feel the awkwardness, and it was so painful to watch, just him kind of like trying to get through to them because he didn't know how to talk to them, right? And he doesn't know how to talk to his own son, so therefore he's got his job, he's trying to get his job, but you got to learn how to speak around that, and, have that kind of emotional awareness and that kind of conversation there. But if it's in your internal home, I think spending time with them, getting to know your child or the person or the young person in your life just as a person, getting to know them. They are going to be reticent. They are going to be like, I don't want to talk to you. I don't want to do that. Sometimes you just got to say, so, like, do you know what I mean? I'm talking to
Mm.
you. Do you know what I mean? And I think there's this whole thing, like I find this kind of, I don't want to say fear, but this reluctance to really lean into young people, and really just kind of press on those buttons, obviously within a respectful way of their autonomy, but also understanding that they are adults. I'm not adults, that they are humans. Sorry, like, in that kind of way, respecting them, but also kind of
Alex, don't you think that we develop young men in the cultures that we establish? So if we
yeah,
have a culture of
yeah,
positivity and creativity, we don't need to wonder where all of the youth clubs and
it's
um,
true.
the sports fields and whatever else are, because we have a culture of positivity. You know, Hugh and Warren both know my children. They both know, and I have no compunction about leaving my kids around Hugh, around Jordan, around other friends that we have, because ours is a culture of positivity.
Hmm.
Ours is a culture of wanting to progress.
Yeah,
To our conversation is forward thinking. It's healthy, and when you have environments like that, you have no worries and concerns about introducing your young people into that environment. And a lot of the young people we surround ourselves with, they're people who want to achieve, who want to do things, who want to have healthy communication. And so there is no debate about how to relate to these young people. And this is what not so much fascinates me, but it actually frustrates me in some ways, because yes, there are people who feel disenfranchised within our society, young people who feel disenfranchised. That is not culture specific.
mm.
It's right across the young
But
people right now who don't feel that there's a place for them. And it's
oh,
toxic. It's made worse by mobile phones, because where there is that vacuum, big tech will fill it. It will keep kids in their beds for an hour and a
Absolutely.
half longer, looking at reels, looking at nonsense, looking at violence, looking at misogyny, looking at sexual content, inappropriate sexual content. And it, it just looks also harmless, because there they are scrolling on their phones and you want to protect their privacy. But ultimately, you're just in plain sight allowing them to be taken away from you. And
Darren,
we have how to change that.
Yeah.
on that note, I've got a close relative who told me of a friend of hers who has a son, and she's very concerned about this, about her son. The son is he's in his teens, and the parents are scared out of their wits in terms of the direction he's going in. 3 or 4 years ago, I had him in for a day's work experience where I work, and he was great. He wants to be a content creator, um, but 3, 4, 5 years on now, he's smoking weed. He's moving with
Hmm.
the wrong crowd. He's lost all his manners. And I fear this is only going in one direction. Another young man who I know is a bit older, my brother's age, 33. He lives at home with his mum still, but he never, apart from going to the toilet, leaves his bedroom. He leaves his house maybe twice a year. Okay. And that, to coming back to Darren's point about devices, I can only imagine, assume that he's spending 20 odd hours a day just watching stuff on the internet. Okay. Now, those are two different examples of two young men who I know of who have different examples, but I'm equally fearful for both of their futures. And I just wonder, with the social media element, is the genie out of the bottle in terms of what we've now exposed a generation of young people, but for the sake of this conversation, young men? Has social media accelerated a problem that was probably already there? And if so, is there any way now of using social media to try and turn round a generation of young boys who are just literally walking around, if they are leaving their homes at all, consuming? Whoever wants to kind of pick up on that has
Well,
been
it's a really
unclear.
good question, and I'll let the guys get in on this. Forgive me, but I do just want to jump in very quickly with something here, because one of the first things you asked me is about the column I wrote last week about the fact that there are leaders, right? And so the last question that you just asked is actually a really good one, because maybe we can use social media to our advantage to highlight people like Sace Holmes Lewis, whose Mentivity program has been doing work for years, identifying, rescuing, empowering, teaching, inspiring young people, young men, young women. People like Solomon Smith, the soup kitchens in Brixton have been doing fantastic work for the last 10 years. Ben Lindsay, Fight the Power, likewise, inspiring, motivating, empowering young people. Dean Forbes, magnificent Black British entrepreneur, inspiring and seeing, giving somebody someone to aspire to. The referees, the Black referees who are building a space for themselves in a sport that doesn't want to give them a space, doesn't want to empower them. There are lots of people who are using social media to show the wider public, the young men and women who might feel disenfranchised, might not feel that there is something, a place for them. There is a place for them. Social media is showing you that. All of these people and so many more. We were debating the many people, Hugh, Jordan, that there are out there who are doing great work, that we owe it to them to shout about what they're doing. Are we doing enough to tell people what they are doing? Because we can use social media we can turn it almost on its head and continue to amplify the work that they're doing so that people aren't working in silos and it becomes interconnected.
But
We
just
we
be
have the
just
power. I don't have the despair that some people have, because
no, I hear.
all
Go on.
these problems, Jordan, it's being able to say, do you know what? If it's tough, but if I'm out of the house and my son is locked in his room, then I need to go and spend more time with my son. I need to put the money second and my son first. We have the power to correct these problems, but it's going to be tough, and there are sacrifices that we have to make. It's going to be tough because the politicians don't care about us. Politicians go on TV and say whatever the prevailing wind is. So what we have to do, a little bit like what people did during COVID when Boris Johnson said, "Don't worry, it's all fine. You do what you have." And people said, "I'm going to do what I need to do for my family. Forget about the politics."
But sorry,
We have to.
let me go to Hugh and Alex next, but we are short on time. Hugh, I
Sure.
whilst I share much of Darren's optimism and hope, and he's totally correct, there are people, I say men, people doing the work on the ground to engage with these young men and give them a brighter future. I still get my plantain and my hard food from Brixton Market once a week, and I still encounter young men on the street. And this could be anecdotal. It could be anecdotal. I still see young men angry, doing with no manners, just doing things that make me really, really fearful and sad. So whilst I agree there is great work being done, and Darren's article is bang on, we should highlight that it's not all doom and gloom. But the reality that I see is that this problem, in spite of the great people doing great work, the problem seems to be growing. Now, that might be because I work in the media and I'm a victim of, do you know what I mean? Being told
Mm.
a problem is a crisis. I'm prepared to accept that. But I do see the problem still in existence. So how do we use social media, if at all, to try and turn the ship and get these young men back on track?
Yeah, for me, social media is incredibly powerful and obviously has a huge effect on younger people or anyone who spends a lot of time consuming it. But we live in the real world, and we need to bring these boys back to the real world, family, love, friends, connection to their
Yes.
real world. And listen, I understand what Darren's saying. There are many, many people doing brilliant, brilliant work. Aside from the people working through their own charities or organizations to help directly, it's great to use people who are doing incredible things with their careers as role models for these people. But we need to get back to the fact that You know, a guy that works for Thames Water is a role model. A guy that works for BT is a role model. You know, someone who takes care of their family, work hard every day. Someone who's a soldier is a role model. You know, it isn't about, and that's the problem. You know, the effect that these online influencers are having is because they are filling the void. These people that feel like, these young people that possibly feel like there isn't a pathway for them, or where do they go with their lives? How do they become a productive, successful member of society? Are being told online, wake up at 5:30, go to the gym, get wedge, get a partner, get a woman, get a good-looking woman, get some money, get a car, get a Lamborghini, you know, get a big house. You know, this is how you'll be, firstly, a productive member of society, but secondly, a successful person. You know, no one is saying that success is not rooted in all of those material things or physical things. It is rooted in taking care of your loved ones. Success is about being able to come home and see your family, spend time with your children in the future. It's being able to take care of your parents in the future. It doesn't mean that you have to have 7 zeros in your bank account, you know, to be a successful person. And although I'd love to say we've got to do that on social media, because the opposite story is being told on social media, in fact, as we all experienced, you know, it is the real world which gives you a sense of belonging, which gives you that direction to drive yourself through life. It should be, anyway, in my opinion, the real world, the people that have that day-to-day physical contact with you. We can't let social media replace us being, you know, in contact with our family, friends, young people in our communities, full stop, whether we're related to them or not. You know, we need to be the people physically in front of them, showing them what life is actually all about. Like that for me is more important than changing the algorithm. I don't know what you think, Alex.
I'll give you the final word, Alex. Or just maybe want to pick up on that, but also if there's any young men, and there will be, listening to this podcast who do feel disillusioned, do feel lost, maybe even close to kind of going down the wrong direction because they can't get a job or they can't earn the money that they would like to live the life they want to lead. It's a big question for a very short period of time, I accept. But what would be your message to those young boys to
Just before
ensure
you,
that they...
do you know what? So I wasn't going to do this, and I apologize to all. I just want to just clarify something, because I just think that you were missing my point that I was making earlier. I'm saying, Jordan, if you're seeing people on the street still in, you say you come out of Brixton, wherever, but it could be anywhere, then I'm saying to you is this: we need to join the dots. We can't be saying there isn't any of the things that we had when we were younger, and then say that it's futile to amplify the kind of thing that is being built specifically to attract, support, empower the kind of people that we are seeing out on the street. You were saying, Hugh, that we live in the real world, but in the real world, the kids have these, taking them into a virtual world. So what we do is we amplify those places, those people, those programs, those projects, those places where people can go and actually
I hear what you said. If they're going to
tell
be
the world
online anyway, we might as well show them the good stuff that's out there online.
the positive stuff.
Sure.
Absolutely. We
Sure.
can't be worrying about that. We can be obviously concerned about it, but there are people doing the work. There are leaders out there inspiring. We can help them. We can do our, we all have the power to change the things we can. And we have to take that rather than buying into the despair of people who don't live our lives,
No.
who don't understand the real world, who, after they've given their sound bites, whatever, they're going to get into their ministerial car that takes them from their house to Westminster. They don't have a clue about the real world. Even the so-called socialists who believe that they identify with you and me, they don't. So we have to do that work. And it's not easy. It's hard. It's mucky. It's messy. But if we are going to have a chance in this space, we need to understand what we're up against.
Yeah,
and just
sorry to interrupt. Just to clarify my point in return, I'm not saying don't amplify those voices online at all.
Yeah.
It's not my point. My point is showing people in real life is as important, in my opinion.
And that's my point. That's what these guys are doing. That's what Sace is doing. That's what
Can
Ben's
Alex
doing.
wrap
That's
up?
what Dean's doing.
Can Alex wrap up? Can Alex just... Is that all right? We got
Alex is doing that.
Alex.
I didn't even mention Alex. I didn't mention Farron Paul. I didn't mention all the people who are out there working doing
let
that,
Alex-
doing exactly the kind of thing that people are sitting in armchairs.
Drum roll,
somewhere
Alex.
saying, "Where is
Can we
this?"
let Alex just say all that? Is that all right? Thank you, Darren. Alex,
Listen,
final word to
I
you.
have I have nothing else to add other than I'm optimistic. Number one, I'm also a bit of a luddite, so I would take them phones and smash them and be like, get into the real world and look up and look outside. In what sense? But also at the same time, I don't know. I think that I speak more to the adult men than I do to the younger men at this moment in time, because I feel like we shouldn't be like and this is to myself as well. I shouldn't be walking into the street and trembling when I'm seeing a young person acting a fool. You know what I mean? I'm still trying to figure out and define what adulthood looks like to me as a man. If I see something, I should be able to just stand up and be like, what's going on with this? But again, a lot of young people, when it comes to respecting elders, when it comes to respecting older people, that's something that, as Darren was saying, is kind of developed internally. So when they go out, they actually can see those things. And if you don't see that, then what can you do? It's a very complex issue. There's so many different ways to look at it. But, you know, I'm optimistic. There are people out there doing work, you know, and I think that as we continue to amplify these voices and these names, then we're going to see some sort of change very soon as well. And have more conversations like this. You guys are doing great work as well, you know?
Thank you very much. Alex, we're going to put your links to your site and your LinkedIn in the description. But just quickly, where can people find the work you do? And if any young men want to engage with you, where can they find you?
My website and LinkedIn. that's all. That's the only place I am.
What's the website address?
What's the website address?
My website is alexholmes.co. And that's
Lovely.
.co, yeah, because I decolonized the domain. You know what I mean?
I love that. Go and check out Alex's work. Thank you very much, Alex, for joining us on the pod this week. Slightly less important, you can follow us also on our socials. We are on social media. We are across X, we are on Instagram, and subscribe to us on YouTube if you haven't already done so. On all of your sorry?
TikTok.
What was that? We're on TikTok as well, and all of your favorite podcast platforms too. Until next week, we out. Peace.